Hi, I'm Rebecca Springer, a partner here at Crowell & Moring. I'm here with one of my fellow partners, Trina Fairley Barlow. Today we're going to talk about some Service Contract Act issues that federal contractors face frequently. How are you, Trina?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Rebecca.
So one of the questions I have is, does the Service Contract Act apply to a contract with the government that's for both services and equipment?
It's a good question, Rebecca. The answer is it depends. The Service Contract Act applies to contracts that are over $2,500 for contracts entered into with the federal government or the District of Columbia, where the principal purpose of the contract is for services through the use of service employees. Now, the Service Contract Act does not define principal purpose. Some commentators state that a good rule of thumb for deciding the principal purpose question is the 50% rule. So, for example, if more than 50% of the time is spent on the contract, it's a good indication that the contract is probably principally for services. But the point here is that you can have a contract that is principally for services, but also have a requirement that the contractor include equipment or supplies in addition to those services. And the Department of Labor has already stated that those types of contracts are covered by the Service Contract Act. So, for example, you could have a contract for data collection services or to conduct a survey, but along with that contract, then the contractor is also required to provide a report or a computer printout of documents. That does not stop the contract from being covered by the Service Contract Act. Now, the FAR provisions applicable to the Service Contract Act, though, are clear that a service contract is a contract where service workers will actually perform an identified task as opposed to just providing an end product or equipment. So looking at this in its totality, from a practical standpoint, contractors should do a couple of things to determine if the SCA or the Service Contract Act is applicable to a contract. First, they should look at their contract to determine whether or not the Service Contract Act provision or clause has been incorporated into the contract. Usually we see that stated as FAR provision 52.222-41. And then a contractor should also determine whether or not a wage determination has been included with the contract. Note that it is the contracting officer's responsibility to ensure that the SCA clause and at least one wage determination is included in the contract. And if those two things exist, it's a pretty good indication that the Service Contract Act likely applies to the contract unless the contractor is able to qualify for one of the exemptions that are listed in the Act itself or in the regulations implementing the Service Contract Act.
Thanks, Trina. That's really helpful. I guess my next question would be, if the contract is an SCA covered contract, does that mean that all of the employees who are working on the contract are entitled to SCA wages and fringe benefits?
It's a good question. The answer is no. The Service Contract Act only applies to service employees, meaning those who are non-exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So that means that exempt professionals, executives, or administrative employees are not covered by the Act. A key misstep that we see, though, is when contractors improperly classify employees as exempt when they should actually be non-exempt. Given the stringent suspension and debarment requirements of the SCA, it's important to identify any classification errors and fix them as soon as possible.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Thank you.